The drought had ravaged Makeba's village in rural Ethiopia for 18 months. What was once fertile farmland now resembled cracked pottery, parched and broken. At 34, Makeba had witnessed hardship before, but never like this. Her husband had left 6 months ago, promising to find work in the city and send money back. The letters stopped coming after the second month. Makeba's 8-year-old daughter, Nia, grew thinner each day. Their meager food supplies dwindled to nothing but a small sack of millet. The village well had dried up weeks ago, forcing everyone to trek 5 kilometers to a muddy stream that barely flowed. "Mama, I'm so thirsty," Nia whispered, her voice cracking from dehydration. Makeba stroked her daughter's forehead, feeling the heat of fever radiating from her skin. One by one, their neighbors had packed whatever they could carry and left for the refugee camp near the capital. The government had promised aid, but in their remote location, help never materialized. Now, only Makeba and Nia remained in a cluster of 5 huts. Makeba couldn't leave, not with Nia's fever worsening daily. "Please, someone help us," Makeba cried out each evening at the village center, her voice echoing in the abandoned settlement. No one answered, not the local officials who had disappeared months ago, not the international aid organizations overwhelmed with countless similar crises across the continent. In desperation, Makeba had tried carrying Nia toward the refugee camp, but after 2 kilometers, her own strength failed. They returned to their hut, where Makeba crushed their last medicinal herbs into a tea for Nia's fever. That night, as Nia slept fitfully on their thin mat, Makeba stepped outside and looked toward the starlit horizon. She felt utterly alone. The ancestral spirits her grandmother had taught her to revere seemed to have abandoned them too. A distant rumble caught her attention. Not thunder, there hadn't been rain for over a year. The sound grew louder, mechanical. Headlights appeared on the dirt road leading to the village, bouncing wildly as the vehicle navigated the uneven terrain. Makeba stood frozen, uncertain whether to hide or call for help. The vehicle, a large, well-equipped Land Rover, stopped at the village entrance. A tall man stepped out, followed by 2 others carrying supplies. "Is anyone here?" the tall man called out in perfect Amharic. "We've brought medicine, food, and water." Gideon Kalu had not planned to visit this particular village. The successful businessman from Lagos had been traveling throughout East Africa, personally delivering aid to drought-stricken communities bypassed by larger organizations. His pharmaceutical company had thrived over the past decade, and at 45, Gideon had decided his wealth meant little if not used to help others. "Sir, this village isn't on our map," his assistant Jabari had said earlier that day. "The satellite images show it's nearly abandoned." "All the more reason to check," Gideon had replied. "Those left behind need help most." Now standing in the dusty clearing, Gideon watched as a thin woman emerged from a hut, her eyes wide with disbelief. "My name is Gideon Kalu," he said gently. "We've brought supplies. Are you alone here?" "My daughter," Makeba managed, her voice breaking. "She's very sick. Everyone else has gone." Gideon motioned to his team. One carried a medical kit, the other boxes of food and containers of clean water. They followed Makeba to her hut, where Nia lay shivering despite the evening heat. Dr. Abena Mensah, the physician who traveled with Gideon's team, immediately examined the child. "Severe dehydration and malaria," she diagnosed, preparing an IV drip. "We arrived just in time." While Dr. Mensah worked, Gideon learned Makeba's story, how the drought had destroyed their livelihood, how her husband had left and never returned, how the village had emptied person by person until only she remained, too scared to leave with a sick child and nowhere to go. "Why did you come here?" Makeba asked, watching as Jabari set up solar-powered lights in her hut. No one else did. Gideon looked away, momentarily unable to meet her gaze. "I grew up in a village not unlike this one," he finally said. "During a drought 30 years ago, my mother and sister died because no one came to help. My father and I survived only by chance." He paused. "I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I would be the person who comes when everyone else leaves." Outside, Gideon's team unloaded more supplies: water purification systems, medicine, food stores that would last months, seeds for when the rains eventually returned. They worked efficiently, having done this in dozens of villages before. "Tomorrow," Gideon told Makeba, "we'll discuss what you want to do. Stay here with support or relocate. The choice will be yours." For the first time in months, Makeba felt hope return, fragile as a butterfly's wing. Dawn broke with Nia's fever finally subsiding. Dr. Mensah had monitored her throughout the night, administering medicine and fluids. Makeba had slept fitfully beside her daughter, still afraid to believe that help had actually arrived. Outside, Gideon supervised as his team installed a solar-powered water pump connected to a deep well they had begun drilling. His geologists had identified a promising aquifer beneath the village water that had been inaccessible without proper equipment. The villagers who left, Gideon said as Makeba emerged from her hut, do you think they would return if there was reliable water and food? Makeba considered this. Many would. This is ancestral land. They left because they had no choice. Gideon nodded, his vision extended beyond immediate relief. He had seen too many aid efforts that created dependency rather than resilience. Tell me about your life before the drought, he said as they shared a simple breakfast. What did you do? What skills do the people here have? Makeba described their small-scale farming, the woven baskets and textiles some women sold at regional markets, the carpentry skills of several men. She spoke of the school that had closed when the teacher left, of community celebrations now just distant memories. As she spoke, Gideon took notes. Makeba noticed his hands, strong but with small scars and calluses that suggested he hadn't always lived in comfort. Why do you ask these questions? She finally said. Most aid workers just give supplies and leave. I'm not most aid workers, Gideon replied, and this isn't charity, it's investment. He explained his philosophy. Communities needed resources and opportunities, not handouts. His foundation had established microfinance programs, training centers, and market connections in villages across East Africa. People don't want to depend on others, he said. They want to build their own futures. Nia joined them later, weak but alert. Her eyes widened at the activity around their village, workers installing solar panels, testing soil samples, preparing land for a community garden using drought-resistant plants. Are you an angel? She asked Gideon directly, making the adults laugh. No, little one, he answered, just someone keeping a promise. That afternoon, Gideon received a satellite call that required his attention elsewhere. Another crisis, another village. He would need to leave the next day, but promised to return within 2 weeks. My team will stay, he assured Makeba, and I keep my word. Makeba nodded, no longer the desperate woman from the day before. Something had awakened in her, not just gratitude, but determination. True to his word, Gideon returned 14 days later. The transformation of the village startled even him. His team had worked tirelessly, but what impressed him most was how Makeba had mobilized herself and her daughter. Using the satellite phone he'd left behind, Makeba had contacted several former villagers. 3 families had already returned, bringing others with them. The newly drilled well provided clean water. Solar panels powered basic lighting and a communal refrigeration unit for medicine and perishable foods. You've been busy, Gideon observed, watching children playing in what was becoming a village square again. We all have, Makeba replied. There was new confidence in her voice. Your team taught us to maintain the equipment. We've planted the first crops in the greenhouse you designed. The small medical clinic Gideon's foundation had established was now staffed by a nurse who had returned to her home village. Simple but critical care was available daily, with telemedicine connections to doctors in Addis Ababa for complex cases. Nia ran to greet Gideon when his vehicle appeared, now healthy and energetic. She proudly showed him the school lessons she'd been studying through the tablet computers his foundation had provided. 28 people have returned, Makeba told him that evening as the village gathered for a community meal. We've received messages from 15 more families who want to come back. Gideon listened as villagers shared their plans. One wanted to expand traditional textile production using new techniques Gideon's team had introduced. Another spoke of improved agricultural methods that required less water. 2 young men described their training in solar technology maintenance. What struck Gideon was that none of them spoke with the language of charity recipients. These were partners, collaborators in their own resurrection. Later, walking along the perimeter of the village under a vast canopy of stars, Makeba asked the question that had lingered since his first arrival. Of all the places that needed help, why did you really come here? Gideon was silent for a moment. Sometimes we're called to places without knowing why, he finally said. I've learned to listen to that call. What he didn't say was how Makeba's determination reminded him of his own mother's strength before she was defeated by circumstances beyond her control, how Nia's bright eyes held the same curiosity his sisters once had. Tomorrow, he said instead, we begin phase 2. 1 year later, the village of Abara was unrecognizable. The single dirt road had become a network of paths connecting 43 refurbished or newly built homes. The community center housed a school during the day and adult education classes at night. Solar panels glinted from rooftops, powering everything from irrigation pumps to internet-connected computers. Gideon stood with Makeba, now the elected leader of the village council, surveying what they had accomplished together. His initial emergency intervention had evolved into a sustainable development project that had become a model for the region. "The governor is coming next week," Makeba said. "He wants to understand how we succeeded when other resettlement projects failed." Gideon smiled. "Tell him it wasn't my money that made the difference. It was your community's spirit." This was true. While Gideon's foundation had provided resources, technology, and connections, the villagers had contributed the vision and labor. They had adapted traditional knowledge to new challenges, creating hybrid solutions that respected their culture while embracing innovation. Makeba's basket weaving cooperative now sold products internationally through a fair trade network. The village's agricultural system combined ancient crop rotation techniques with modern water conservation. Children learned their ancestors' language and history alongside mathematics and science. "We're expecting visitors from 3 other communities next month," Makeba said. "They want to learn our methods." Nia, now 9 and thriving, ran past them with friends, heading to the community garden she had helped design. Unlike the other children, she still treated Gideon with a certain reverence, leaving small gifts of stones or feathers outside his room whenever he visited. That evening, at a celebration marking the village's official recognition by the regional government, Gideon was asked to speak. Uncomfortable with praise, he kept his words brief. "A year ago, I found 2 people who refused to abandon hope," he said. "Now I see hundreds. You've rebuilt not just homes, but possibilities." Later, as musicians played traditional songs and people danced under the stars, Gideon watched from the periphery. His work here was largely complete. Next week, he would travel to another region, another crisis. Makeba found him there. "You're leaving again," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Others need help now," he replied. "And you'll come back." "This is part of my path now," he said, gesturing toward the celebration. "How could I not?" As the night deepened, Gideon reflected on how his personal mission had evolved. What began as atonement for his inability to save his own family had become something larger, a recognition that one person's action, at the right moment, could change trajectories for hundreds. Abara village would continue to face challenges. The climate was still changing, political systems still fragile, but they would face these challenges with resources, knowledge, and most importantly, the unshakable confidence that comes from having risen once before. In the end, it wasn't just Gideon who had saved Makeba and Nia. In their own way, through their perseverance, they had also saved him.